So the subject of my talk is what I call the information war that has been waged against Israel, that is being waged against Israel. This is a war that really was the brainchild of Brezhnev and the Soviet Union in 1969. And basically the idea was that after the Six-Day War, there was a sense that Israel was invincible, that the Israelis had scored such an extraordinary victory on all fronts and so quickly. The question was, well, how is Israel going to be defeated? And the decision that was made in the Kremlin at the time was that what really needed to happen is that the image of Israel had to be destroyed, that Israel's ability to discuss reality in any coherent fashion had to be wrecked. And that was really what instigated quite a bit of the information war that we see. It percolated through the Soviet relationship with the PLO that was just building up their activities and their expertise in airline hijacking and other things. And then it was brought into Europe, into Western Europe, through different Communist Front organizations, and it has morphed into what we have today, which is a full-blown red-green alliance of the left and the Arab world against Israel, trying to delegitimize Israel's right to exist in order to prevent the Jewish state from using the means necessary to defend itself from aggression. And I just want to, first of all, if I say that there's an information war, I think that what's really important is to explain what it is. What is the anatomy of this war that is being waged against Israel, and with great success actually for around 41 years now. And the information war that is being waged against Israel basically has three components. The first component is to hide information about the Middle East from the general public, particularly in the Western world, but also, by the way, in Israel from the Israeli public. The second component of the information war against Israel is to present false information, that is to lie about what's happening. So first you hide the truth, second you report and you frame a discussion that is based around falsehoods. And then the third aspect, which is in many ways the most insidious, is to place Israel, to judge Israel by a standard that no other country, no other entity, no other people has ever been judged by. Well, the Jewish people have since time immemorial, but that the notion that there is a double standard that applies only to Israel and to judging Israel and to assessing Israel's behavior, those are the three components of the information war that is being carried out against Israel. And I think that it's enough to look at the reportage on the Middle East generally and on Israel specifically to understand really how completely irrelevant the discourse that has been ongoing in the West, and by the way also in Israel, about the Middle East conflict, the sources of the Middle East conflict, the basis of the Middle East conflict, the reality of what's happening in the Middle East, to understand just how incredibly successful this war has been in completely distorting the dialogue and the debate and the discourse about the Middle East to the point where many people, many good people throughout the West wouldn't know the truth about the Middle East if it came up and bit them on the rear end. And so what do I mean when I say hiding information? Well, my colleague from the Jerusalem Post, Khaled Abu Tuama, and my friend as well, is going to speak quite a bit about the nature of the Palestinian Authority. And so I'm just going to give the headlines of how I would characterize that in terms of hiding information. The Palestinian Authority is an authority that Israel essentially created by bringing the PLO under Yasser Arafat into Judea and Samaria and Gaza in 1994 under the auspices of the Oslo Peace Treaty, or the Oslo Accord that it had signed with the PLO in 1993. And since it was established, Israel armed them. They enabled the Palestinians to outfit numerous, 17 in fact, different security forces that are armed to the teeth, originally with Israeli weapons, and since then by American, Russian, European, Indonesian, anybody who wants to gets to arm them and say that they're doing it in the interest of peace. And these are considered to be moderate Palestinians. The PLO is considered to be moderate Palestinians. So, we can talk for a second about the difference between the PLO and Hamas, but before we do, I just want to say that Fatah, the PLO's governing arm, which is what Arafat was the head of and what Mahmoud Abbas today is the head of, what Salam Fayyad would like to be the head of. All of these people who are presented to the West as moderates are members of Fatah. Well, Fayyad isn't, but he is allied with Fatah. At any rate, Fatah is the most active terrorist organization. They have killed more Jews since 1993 than any other terrorist organization operating in the Palestinian territories, more than Hamas. Between 2000, when the Palestinians began their terror war against Israel at the end of the the failed Camp David Peace Summit in July 2000, until Israel effectively defeated the Palestinian terror war in the summer of 2004, Fatah carried out more successful bombings, killed more people, more Israelis than Hamas did. And it's just important to put that marker out there, because when we talk about Fatah, again, part of hiding the information is that, yes, people will allow that Hamas is a terrorist organization, but what they hide is that Fatah is a terrorist organization. And it's very important to recognize that. But if you have that hidden from view, and you're not presenting the public with any of the information about Fatah's sponsorship of terrorism, its incitement against Israel, against Jews, against the United States, the fact that it's indoctrinating Palestinian children from the age of 0 to the cause of jihad, and to believing that their life's goal should be to die killing Jews and annihilating the Jewish people in the state of Israel, we see how crazy the discourse is, that one of the major actors in the region that has always enjoyed, with the benefit of every doubt, the label of moderate, when they are in fact bloodthirsty terrorists who hate Jews and indoctrinate their children to hate Jews and to reject the existence of the state of Israel. We see that just that in and of itself, that information being hidden from the public, has massively distorted the discussion about the Middle East since at least 1993, if not longer. And this is a real problem, because the fact is indisputable that Fatah is a terrorist organization, and yet it is never raised. And this is a huge victory for people who don't want the public to understand the truth. Not a narrative, not a competing narrative, but actually that old-fashioned thing called truth that actually does exist behind all of the lies that we're told day in and day out about the Middle East. So they hide information about the nature of the Palestinian Authority, the nature of the Palestinians who are supposed to be Israel's peace partners, to devastating effect. And just as Fatah is mischaracterized systematically, not only, by the way, by the media, but definitely by the media, but also by the chancelleries of power in the European Union, as well as in the U.S. State Department, and on and on and on. So too, we see hidden from view the nature of Israel's neighbors. I mean, it's not just Iran that the Obama administration pretends is a stable regime, and that it's not worth anybody's while to support the Iranian people who wish to overthrow that regime and are willing to die fighting these barbaric police forces and security forces of the regime with the hopes of overthrowing them, and would rather, in fact, placate and appease and allow and placate this horrible regime, but that they're even willing to make deals to enable this regime to continue to enrich uranium, and do that not only at the expense of freedom throughout the Middle East, also at the expense of the Iranian people. But we do have some discussion about the nature of the Iranian regime. So in a way, Iran is a special case, that people actually know that the mullahs are bad. But we hear about moderate regimes, and by the way, in Israel as well, moderate Arab states. What are these moderate Arab states that we're told about? And it's mind-numbing. We always hear about the moderate Muslim state, moderate Arab states. And who are they? Egypt, Jordan. There's nothing moderate about these states. I mean, it is a misnomer. What you have are regimes that are supported by the West, that are completely dependent, in Egypt's case, on the United States military assistance, and in Jordan's case, on a security guarantee from Israel, and on U.S. assistance, both military and political. They are regimes that are despised by their people. They are dictatorships, and specifically in the case of Egypt, there is a massive looming threat of what will happen in Egypt, a country of 70 million people, after the ailing dictator Hosni Mubarak dies. Because throughout the long period of his reign, since 1981, in Egypt, the only forces inside of Egyptian society whom he has allowed the freedom of speech are the Muslim Brotherhood, who Charles properly characterized during his speech this morning as barbarians. And they are the strongest non-regime political force inside of Egypt. And the probability that they will be able to seize power, and that American military, that extraordinary military that Egypt has been able to attain since the Camp David peace accords with Israel, that probability is quite high. And nobody is discussing it. That is the elephant in the middle of the room that nobody is willing to acknowledge, because we're so busy assuring ourselves that Egypt is a moderate state. It is not a moderate state. And by the way, that regime that is so moderate because it is dependent on the United States and U.S. military and civilian aid, it's an economic basket case, and it is deeply, deeply hostile to Israel. We talk about the political war that is going on against Israel in places like the UN. Who leads it? The Egyptians. In every single arena where you see General Assembly resolutions being used against Israel in the guise of international law, which they are not, where you see Israel being treated like not a pariah state, but as something that makes the Nazi regime look sweet and clean by comparison, it is the Egyptian diplomatic mission that is behind it. And beyond that, when you look at the military order of battle of the Egyptian military, you see that in their major military exercise every single year, what are they practicing warring against? The target of the war exercises that the Egyptian military carries out year after year is an unnamed country to Egypt's north, and it is not Syria, and it's not Jordan, and it's not Lebanon. They are training their military to fight Israel. But again, all of this information is hidden from view. It is hidden from the public so that when people discuss Egypt, they get a completely false image in their mind of what Egypt is. Anybody here visited Egypt? You know, when you leave like the 14th or 15th floor of your hotel, doesn't the stench just overpower you? I mean, this is a fourth world country. It is an economic basket case. The overwhelming majority of Egyptians subsist on subsistence farming, and they are the subject of massive desertification. They can't feed their own people increasingly, and increasingly they can't provide jobs to their young people. Their public sector is massive because they have no private sector development, and they have all of these angry young men who have absolutely no chance not only of finding gainful employment, but of being able to pay a dowry to get married. Now, who's going to be attracting these people? Not hard to guess where they go for solace and for spiritual growth, to the mosque. And what are they learning in the mosque? They are learning in the mosque that what they really have to do to get by in life is to die in the name of Allah and in the cause of jihad, and to topple the Western imperialists and, of course, the Jews who are responsible for their lot in life. This is what's happening in Egypt. And by the way, in Jordan. You know, in Jordan, we talk about Jordan being such a moderate state. Jordan exists because Israel saved it in 1970 from the PLO's attempted takeover of Jordan during Black September in September of 1970. It was a civil war. And how can you say it was a civil war if the PLO was fomenting it against the Hashemites? Because the majority of Jordanians are Palestinians. And they were rising up against a minority regime that was installed there by British imperial authorities in 1920. But we don't understand any of this because all of this is hidden from us. So then when we hear about Jordan, we immediately see that King Abdallah went to prep school in the United States, and he speaks so beautifully that it can just take your breath away about peace and blah, blah. And his wife is absolutely gorgeous, and everybody wants to sit next to her and find out where she got her makeup done. And the problem is that all of this is completely irrelevant to the fact of the matter, that Jordan itself is an inherently unstable basket case that is also economically backwards, and that their development, such as it is a result of Israeli industrial operations inside of Jordan that have provided gainful employment to tens of thousands of Jordanians along the border with Israel. It has to do with the fact that they receive a security guarantee from the state of Israel that has protected the Hashemites since they were installed in 1948 and beyond, and that the United States government also supports the Hashemite regime. Without such external support from the West, the Jordanians wouldn't survive a day. And that is an extremely important thing, and I'm not saying that they should be overthrown, God forbid. What I am saying is that when we talk about things, we're not talking about them as they are. Our discourse is based upon information that is wrong, or that, which is what I'm going to get to, or it is lacking information because that information is hidden from view time after time after time. Another thing that's hidden from view, very important, the nature of the two-state solution. To understand even slightly the notion of what a two-state solution is about, you have to know things that are never discussed, one of which is that the Jewish people were lawfully given as a mandate, or the British were enjoined by the League of Nations through their mandate system that was based upon the 1920 San Remo Conference, to establish a Jewish home where, on both sides of the Jordan River, from the Mediterranean Sea to Iraq, that the Jewish state that was lawfully supposed to be built by the British mandatory authorities after World War I was supposed to encompass all of Israel, all of the West Bank, and all of Jordan. And then illegally, in complete abrogation of their mandate, the British in 1926 carved off Transjordan and gave it to the Hashemites, who were the sore losers of the Arab world after World War I. They were supposed to have received Syria, but the French took it and threw them out. And so as a booty prize, the British government, the British imperial authorities gave the Hashemites Jordan, which they created out of thin air. And then the Jews were supposed to have the rest of it. But then again, illegally, the British issued the 1939 White Paper that prevented Jews from buying land almost anywhere in the areas that were supposed to be open for Jewish settlement. They illegally barred Jews from Europe from escaping to what was supposed to be their homeland. All of these things that we see today, where the concentration of the Jews, 80% of Israeli Jews, are concentrated between Haifa and Tel Aviv, is because of the pathologies of illegal British mandatory actions towards the Jews of Palestine before 1948, that they illegally barred Jewish land purchases, that they illegally barred Jewish immigration. And none of this is ever discussed. Nobody ever understands that. They don't understand as well that from 1937 on, practically every other year, there was another partition plan that screwed the Jews in order to appease the Arabs of the land of Israel, and time after time after time, they rejected it. They rejected them because they didn't accept the basic notion that the Jews had a right to exist. Chaim Weizmann, who is no hawk, said in 1937 that the problem with that particular partition plan that had been put on the table was that it gave Jews anything, that he would accept a partition plan if they gave the Jews a state the size of a postage stamp, if the Arabs would accept it. But the Arabs would accept no sovereign Jewish presence whatsoever in the land of Israel, and as a consequence, there was never a two-state solution beyond the two-state solution of the 65% of the mandate that was illegally given to the Hashemite monarchy or dynasty by the British imperial authorities. And all this stuff is out there, it is information, it is fact, and it is hidden. Nobody knows it, and so when you talk about the two-state solution, you automatically get the sense that Israel has to cough up territory, that it's all about Israel compromising. And what the basic lie of that's hidden from view is that every single time that a two-state solution, aside from the fact that Jordan is in fact Palestine, is brought to the table, what is hidden from view is that the Arabs refuse to accept a two-state solution because that would require them to accept a Jewish state. They will not do so. There can't be a two-state solution. And yet time after time, it doesn't matter who's in the White House, all we ever hear about it in mind-numbing pace is we need a two-state solution, we need a two-state solution. The last thing that I want to discuss that's hidden from view is the fact of Jewish rights. Jews are not perceived by the international discourse on the Middle East to have any inherent rights to the land of Israel, which is obscene. It's crazy. It is a distortion of fact, of biblical proportions, literally, to say that the Jewish people don't have any legal, sovereign, historical rights to the land of Israel. And yet you hear it over and over and over again that today the discourse has become so distorted that nobody questions whether there should be a Palestinian Arab state in addition to the Palestinian Arab state east of the Jordan River, called Jordan. The question is whether Jews actually have a right to statehood at all. Well, either it isn't inherently racist for the Jewish people, the first people to ever determine, to ever define themselves, to have self-determination. We had it at Mount Sinai. And they say that we are not a nation. The longest living nation in the world, the Jewish people, are deracinated by the international discourse on Israel. We have no right to statehood because we're not a people. This is pure Arab and Soviet propaganda against the Jewish people, and it's extraordinarily anti-Semitic, because it's saying that of all of the people on the face of the planet, the one people that isn't allowed to have self-determination is the oldest people on the face of the planet. It's saying that the Jews as Jews have no right to define who we are. That is deeply and inherently anti-Semitic. And yet that today lies at the basis of this false discourse that we have on the Middle East, because the notion that Jews have rights to land, rights to sovereignty, rights to national power, not to mention the right to self-defense, are all increasingly not only being called into questions, but denied. And these are all very basic issues, very basic issues. Now, what are we being lied to about? If this is what's being hidden from view, if the nature of Israel's enemies, the nature of Israel's neighbors, the fact of Jewish rights, if all of this stuff is being hidden from view, what is making up, what comprises the discourse? Well, we have an extraordinary number of falsities, of falsehoods, of utter and complete lies. And let me just give you a couple very trivial ones, seemingly trivial. Anybody ever heard of a hardline Arab? You cannot find almost an Israeli politician or political leader who actually stands up for Israel's right in the international arena who's not referred to as a hardliner. On the other hand, we hear fictions all the time about moderate elements in Hamas, moderate elements in the Taliban, moderate elements in Hezbollah. You know, you have a counterterrorism advisor to the President of the United States who believes that there are moderate elements in Hezbollah. But where are the moderate elements in Israeli society? Well, there aren't any. We're all hardliners. And this is a caustic label. It's a caustic label because it says that, by definition, an Israeli who isn't willing to just cough up Jerusalem, essentially, because that's what's on the table today, is a hardliner, anti-peace, an enemy of peace. He is an obstacle to peace. On the other hand, a Palestinian leader like Mahmoud Abbas, who controls the Palestinian media that daily calls for the annihilation of the Jewish people, he's moderate. It's true. I mean, that is the discourse. Look at the New York Times. Read it. See what they say. Bibi Netanyahu, who is begging, and I think wrongly, insanely, but whatever, he is begging Mahmoud Abbas to have direct negotiations with Israel. He's the hardliner in this question. Nobody ever asks, hey, Abbas, what exactly is your problem? What is your problem? Because doing so would also require them to ask some questions that are unpleasant. Like, for instance, even if he were a moderate, which he is not, patently judge him by his actions, not by his English words. Even if he were a moderate, if he made peace with Israel, how long would he live? 30 seconds or just 25? He would not be long for this world. He wouldn't, and he's not interested in martyrdom. He's not. And so nobody wants to ask that question, because if, no matter how you slice it, any answer that you get is going to show that it isn't Israel's fault that there's no peace in the Middle East. Nobody wants to ask that question, so they don't. So instead we get this inane discourse in which all Israeli leaders are hardline. Ariel Sharon expelled for no reason, and I would say unconscionably, in a moral crime against his own people, he expelled 10,000 Jews from their communities In Gaza, these are communities that had never existed before. They were sand dunes. The Palestinians said they were going to revert to their original names after the Jews were kicked out, but guess what? Those were their original names. They had never existed before the Jews came there, and then the Palestinians embarrassedly said, never mind. He threw them out of their homes for nothing. And what did he get in return? He was called hardline. He was a hardliner. There's no way that an Israeli leader who is actually even semi-proud of his national heritage and is willing to fight for it is going to be called a moderate. Just won't happen. And this is a falsehood that massively distorts the discourse that we have in the United States, in Europe, and throughout the world on the Middle East, that poisons our ability to even think coherently about what's happening on the ground and how we might move forward to make the world a safer place and to make the region a better place to live for everybody, Jews and Arabs. Let's think for a second about the falsehoods that were told only recently with this silly flotilla thing, right? So we still get it. We still get it. Muammar Gaddafi's son, Jihad, or whatever the hell his name is, he just sent a Libyan ship en route to Gaza, and they still got to be called peace activists. I mean, what we're hearing, we have Turkish jihadists being sent to Israel or to Gaza with the stated intention of ending Israel's lawful blockade of the Gaza coast, and they are referred to as peace activists. They are referred to as peace activists, and a lot of them are American. And by the way, not a few of them are friends with Barack Obama. And it's important to know that. Who was on the ship that went to Egypt 4 months ago? William Ayers, Bernadine Dorn, Jody Evans from Code Pink. Jody Evans was one of the most important fundraisers for Obama. In Southern California, she hosted his first major fundraiser in Hollywood together with David Geffen and Steven Spielberg, two upstanding Jews. These are people who don't have 6 degrees of separation from the White House. These are people who have no degrees of separation from the White House. And what are they involved in? They are involved in a criminal racket to provide aid and comfort to a terrorist organization, a banned terrorist organization by the U.S. State Department. Since 2006, when it won the open democratic elections to the Palestinian Legislative Council, Hamas has been in charge in Gaza, and more so, of course, after they threw out all Fatah forces in June of 2007. This is a criminal jihadist entity that the United States is sworn to war against, not only by U.S. law, but by the law of nations in the form of UN Security Council Resolution 1371 from October of 2001. The United States is treaty bound. That was a resolution that the United States drafted. The United States is legally, lawfully bound by domestic and international law to seek the overthrow of the Hamas regime in Gaza, and instead they are telling Israel that the situation in Gaza is unsustainable. The President of the United States is saying this. This is a massive distortion of reality. It is a massive falsehood on every single level. And the coverage in the press and in the international arena of what happened on May 31st on board the Mavi Marmara terror ship is absolutely indicative of the pathological nature of the discourse on the Middle East in the Western world today. The IHH is a terrorist organization that the previous Turkish government, the non-Islamist terrorist government, barred from providing earthquake relief to Turkish citizens in the great earthquake of 1998 because they were afraid of jihadist indoctrination at the hands of the IHH, which was the organization that under the aegis of this Turkish government ran the Mavi Marmara ship in an attempt to open the Gaza blockade. This is a jihadist organization in accordance to the Turkish government. Forget about what those lying Zionists say, who, by the way, are not liars. But we wouldn't know that because the press says that everything that the Israelis say has to be taken with a grain of salt. And we have this situation where the entire edifice of all of the accepted wisdom on the Middle East is false. It's either false or it's based upon hiding key information necessary to understanding the nature of the conflict, understanding the nature of the actors that are involved, and I think that it is an atrocity. It is simply an atrocity. And lastly, we get to the most insidious aspect of all of this, in my view, because we see otherwise good people actively engaging in it, which is judging Israel by an extraordinary double standard, which sets Israel up as a villain time after time after time. And let me just explain a little bit. When we assess the behavior of every government in the world, every country in the world except Israel, we hold them up, whether it's the United States or France or Britain or Brazil or Argentina or Japan, and on and on and on. We hold them up to Western standards, we judge, in the case of, say, African countries, we judge the actions of the Hutsis and the Tutsis in relation to the Sierra Leones or to the Ghanans or to the Ivory Coast, and so on and so forth. But people are judged, countries are judged in relation to standards of behavior by other countries that are populated, by the way, by imperfect human beings. In Israel's case, what is the standard that Israel is judged against? Perfection. Perfection. There is a standard of perfection against which Israel is judged and, of course, found lacking and guilty every single day of every single year, year in, year out, one time after the other, after the other, after the other. Again, let's look at the Mavi Marmara. You know, I personally am highly critical of the operation that Israel engaged in on the Mavi Marmara for a number of reasons. One, I think that it is unacceptable that our naval commandos should be sent into battle of any kind with toy guns. I just think that it is an insult to the men and women who wear the uniform of the State of Israel that they should be sent into anything even slightly hostile without the benefit of proper arms. And I think that personally I think that the commander of the Israeli Navy should be thrown out of the Army, and I think that the commander of the Naval Commandos should as well be given a pink slip, because they plan, and in the case of the commander of the Naval Commandos, he allowed his forces to be sent into battle in that way, and I think that just for that he should be thrown out. Even though I know him personally and like him, I think that what he did is unconscionable. But that, my friends, is what is called what would be constructive criticism. It's called constructive criticism because what it's saying is, look, you know, you messed up in this operation, you did it wrong. Not that you had no right to carry out this operation. Not that you were fundamentally wrong to think, even for a second, that you had a right to enforce a lawful blockade of the Gaza coast when Gaza is controlled by an illegal terrorist organization that is, by the way, covenantally dedicated to the annihilation of the Jewish people. And to make that kind of assertion has become all too easy in this world. Indeed, not to make that assertion, not to say that Israel has no right to self-defense against these kinds of people, has become the fashionable position to take in polite circles in the world today, in this country today. If you want to be with the in crowd, then you have to deny that Israel has the right to self-defense under every single circumstance. And we can think for a second about the nature of this blockade of Gaza, which, by the way, I think is in and of itself wrong, because I don't think that we should be having a containment strategy towards Hamas. This is a strategy that Israel was forced to adopt by the Bush administration. And I think that Israel wrongly accepted that. I think that Israel should be going into Gaza and overthrowing the Hamas regime. And I think that a policy of containment is a policy that at the end of the day is going to cause more and more and more Israelis to lose their lives, and it's just going to strengthen Hamas and feed the beast more and more and encourage them to believe that they can destroy the Jewish state. But be that as it may, this is a strategy that Israel came up with, a strategy of containment. It is eminently lawful, inarguably lawful. And yet the fashionable position, due to the fact that it is universally practically accepted that Israel should be judged by an impossible standard, that people now say that Israel has no right to self-defense, even in this most passive way. And so when we look at the nature of the discourse of regarding Israel and regarding the Middle East today, what we really see in every single facet, that no matter where we look, we're basing our statements and our arguments and our understanding of the situation on a complete distortion of reality in the region, both as it relates to Israel and as it relates to its neighbors. This is not something that happened by chance. It is in the service of a campaign to delegitimize with the hope of destroying the Jewish country, and unfortunately, it's working. And so I think, we can talk about different things that I'm doing, different things that the state of Israel should be doing or is doing, different things that supporters of Israel in this country and throughout the world ought to be doing, some that are doing. We can talk about that later, but until we recognize the basic depravity of the discourse on Israel and the Arab world, we are going to continue to be in a situation where not only is war being encouraged, wars are being escalated. Not only is the Jewish state and are the Jewish people not enjoying peaceable relations with the Arab world and with the Palestinians, with the Arabs in general, but the whole notion of peace has become completely theoretical and phantasmagorical because the policies that we have been implemented based on false notions about the nature of the Middle East are feeding a situation that can only lead to more war, more bloodshed, and increased extremism and murderous genocidal positions taken on the part of Israel's neighbors in the Middle East and indeed throughout the world. So those are my thoughts.